Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to a whole new kind of thing that we're doing. We are reading Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It, written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Freewata, with the exclamation point for the added emphasis. For some little housekeeping notes, our original channel was taken down due to copyright and everything, so we are playing by the rules. Our author, Ukulele Villain, was happily gracious to allow us permission, and again, thank you so much in advance if you hear this from our end, on reading their fan fiction. They have worked from Archive of Our Own, also known as AO3, I've learned. My wife's trying to teach me these things that she's known, and she's like, finally, Free Wada, babe, you're learning it. You're learning these things and we will learn these as well. I've actually used to play a lot of League of Legends. I haven't learned too much about Arcane myself, but this is probably one of the best ways to get into it. This was also recommended through one of our own subscribers at our channel. So thank you so much for giving me the recommendation to reach out to the author so that we could read it. And without further ado, let's just get into some of the summary and notes that the author has. The summary: Victor was instructed to remove any potentially dangerous materials from Jace Tallis's apartment. He did not expect the child to be one of those things. An alternate universe where Powder was caught in one of the explosions at Jace's apartment. Powder being Jinx, I believe in this. And the notes from the author themselves. The amount of psychic damage I took when I put League of Legends in the fandoms category is unfathomable. Anyway, Arcane is a really good show with a whole lot of nuance I did not expect. The author, if you would like to read it as well on AO3, has translations into Spanish as well as Ukrainian, I believe. So feel free to read along as we go with this. And we'll jump right on in with the prologue. Heimerdinger was neither strict nor lax on his students. His expectations had a way of waning and snapping from passive to active, like a belt looped over a pulley system. It was surprising to those who were just getting to know him, but it made those who understood him roll their eyes. Victor was in the second category. He had met the man when he was 14, and 8 years later, he had found a way to juggle his mentor's simultaneous wisdom and obliviousness. It did not mean he did not rankle under some of the odd demands. 1 week ago, Heimerdinger had made the off color comment that Victor had been leaning into old habits. The man could be so accidentally rude, it was bewildering. Victor had to give it to him. He had no idea when the usage of figurative idioms was appropriate despite being hundreds of years old. Heimerdinger had actually meant hiding. Victor expected his mentor to require some form of group study or one of the usual attempts to get Victor out of his dormitory. It had happened before, on one occasion. Heimerdinger had even grouped Victor with the 4 other students that had been adopted from the fissures. That had been a nice gathering. Nice, in theory. All 5 of the nameless street children sitting in one room as fledgling adults. They were all hoping to forget and were furious to be denied ignorance, while the person sitting across from them had a knowledge that could not be entirely erased. Sky had been there. Lovely, springy hair in a tight bun. She had been adopted by a small artisan with the last name Young. The group's jealousy at this had oozed and swam in the room's air. Victor had felt it in his leg like he could feel rainstorms with a pressure drop. "Congratulations, Miss Young," Victor had said it to her earnestly. He was happy for her, and only maybe a little happy to get under the other students' skins. Heimerdinger had not noticed at all, but Heimerdinger had noticed that Victor remained cautious to spend time with others. Heimerdinger fancied himself a man able to crack hard cases, the ever inconsistent and consistent belt over a pulley. Now Victor stood outside the doorstep of an apartment that was missing an entire outer section of its foundation. Glass still littered the streets and stone masonry lay crumbling on the ground. The poor, ostentatious building was leaning on its side amid its fellow luxury apartments. Victor had heard the enforcer's alarms go off. He had been topside long enough that enforcers shouldn't have made him antsy anymore. He'd only shook a little, and no one had seen anyway. Victor had asked his mentor to not send him to the scene of an act of crime, but Heimerdinger had insisted. "You're my assistant, Victor. I not only trust you to do what the ethos of our academy demands, but I depend on you to also represent me in matters that reflect upon our work poorly. Do you realize how this could put fear into Piltover's population?" Heimerdinger had the oddest ways of getting results, but he got them. Victor bit his tongue when he realized Jace Talis' apartment was on the 4th floor. He bit harder when he showed the enforcers crowding the hallway his credentials, and he tasted blood in his mouth by the time he was examining the intricate workings on a chalkboard that had survived while so much of the building had not. It was a marvel of destruction. Where the wall alongside the balcony had been, there was just a hole that a horse carriage could fit through. Jace Talis was 2 years older than Victor, was well known on campus, beloved by everyone in his class, and rumored to be supported by Councilwoman Kiraman. If Victor had anyone to gossip to, they'd have been shocked to hear that Jace Talis was sitting atop a chair, looking agitated and demanding enforcers stop touching his instruments. Talis had given Victor a cursory glance, but he had ignored him mostly. The sheriff was trying to get answers out of Talis, letting Victor meander. The older woman was equally confused by the destruction. He felt a little bad for her, knowing the council would be demanding explanations she had no way of giving. "Careful!" Talis snapped at a clumsy enforcer kicking rubble aside and inadvertently unlodging a golden spanner disc. "Be careful with those!" Victor interjected finally. "Someone should have said that earlier. What happened here?" Jace Talis had not taken much note of Victor before. "Science, I guess." "I don't remember science including illegal equipment," the sheriff said. She was correct. Yes, our sheriff is Southern and male-sounding as a female, sorry. Jace Talis had over 12 different Undercity, jury-rigged devices, and 4 banned books from the Noxus Empire. Victor took a mental note down that Jace Talis was less eloquent than he had expected for someone at the top of his class. Talis was smarter than he was wise. That had at least been expected. Most Academy students were, and Victor sometimes found himself questioning his own insights. "Who authorized your research?" Talis sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "It was an independent study. Who are you anyway?" Of course it was. "I am an assistant to the dean of the academy." Victor could tell Talis was shocked. No one knew of Victor, and it was hard for an upper-level graduate to see an underclassman being so bold. "Who it may serve you to remember is head of the council. He sent me here to ensure anything dangerous is removed safely, which, according to my list, includes you." "What? I'm not dangerous." They were standing in rubble, and a building that had partially fallen in on 5 people. "That's for the council to decide." Victor had never seen a council trial, but Victor had not expected them to handcuff Talis. The council must have been out for blood. If Talis kept his mouth shut, though, he'd be given a slap on the wrist and be allowed to return to his research within the end of the week. He might even become more popular as a result. Once news got out that Talis had actually gone to the Undercity for illegal tech, the strange disgust and fascination that certain Piltover students had for the lanes, fissures, and the Undercity as a whole would become to bloom. Victor collected the books first, runes and symbols of the Arcane, strangely enough. He was realizing he'd have to make a second trip. A few enforcers stayed watch around the perimeter, but none aided him. Victor passed at the hallway that had previously led to Jace Talis' bedroom, and if he had not paused to look, he may never have heard what he had. The enforcers, on account of Victor's shouts, pulled the small girl out from under the rubble. Her injuries were not severe. In fact, miraculously so. She just seemed dazed. Victor chided himself for not asking what had been in Talus's room. When the girl saw the enforcers, the fog over her mind cleared, and she began to attempt a run. She was about to brutally lose that fight. They had batons, and she almost certainly had injuries. Victor cleared his throat loud enough that they all looked at him. The insanity of 4 grown men versus a 12-year-old had to be dispelled by a reminder that he had been told by the head of the council to collect anything that he deemed dangerous. With all due respect, we saw 3 children fleeing the scene. Even more reason to bring her quietly to the academy, so Professor Heimerdinger can speak with her. It was ludicrous, but it worked. Victor had no weight to throw, but that he was an assistant to the head of the council, and that was enough to make the enforcers back away. That and the men were terrified of magic and of things they did not understand. He could capitalize on that if he needed to, lie, and say the girl had been maybe infected with something from the scene. The girl looked up at Victor, equally terrified. Telling her that he was part of the council would not work. I can tell you're from across the river. She had homespun clothing mixed with the satchels of odds and ends at her waist that were surely for collecting scraps and garbage. Any fissure folk could leap, climb, and run by roofs or through dark back alleyways. If she fled from him, he'd lose her and have to call for the enforcers' help. That couldn't happen. I am too. That caught her attention. She looked skeptical. His clothes were too nice, and children with limps and canes did not survive to his age in the Undercity. She was weighing her options. But then, an enforcer laughed outside, probably at a crude and unrelated joke. It was enough to make her nod and follow him. There was a day before the trial. He had time to learn more before hearing Talus's testimony. Victor realized he wasn't running because of her leg, or she wasn't running because of her leg. There was a large gash at her heel, most likely from the rubble. It dribbled blood the entire way to the infirmary and wouldn't let up, even when the attendant began to put pressure on it. She's going to need stitches. Victor pulled up a chair, an entire day on his feet starting to wear on him. The attendant began to move towards a drawer, and at this moment, the girl whipped her head toward Victor in protest, with her mouth opening and closing like a beached fish. He hated coming to this place after lab accidents, too. It's going to be fine. It stings, but is nothing compared to having a wall collapse on you. The child glared at him. Maybe you could hold your sister's hand, the attendant asked, unaware of the look that passed between the blue-haired child and Victor. He did not correct the attendant. This was already a mess. He opened his calloused hand and held it out. Oddly enough, the girl reached over and squeezed like she was holding on for her life. The attendant finished up with her leg, turned to Victor, and said, "You may need to get her a bath and new clothes if you're taking her to the trial." This made the child throw Victor's hand away like it had burned her. The attendant left, and when Victor turned back to the girl, she had returned to glaring. Victor sighed. I know. The attendant had been right, though. When Victor first came to Piltover, his lab mates couldn't stop mentioning the smell that had seeped into his hair from the fissures in their minds. I heard about the 3 others who fled the scene. I won't ask who they are or how you know them. I just need to know what they took. I think you understand very well how dangerous these materials are. She kicked one of her legs outward and winced. Finally, she spoke. If I just give them back, will you let me go? You won't come after me. Surprising. She knows where they took the stolen goods. It was not uncommon for organized crime in the lanes and most of the Undercity to use children in their work. It was odd they'd relied on such a young girl to steal destructive materials, though. Unless they had had no idea what they were stealing, just grabbing at the many beautiful things Talus had in his apartment. His apartment must have been dreamlike to them, and all of its contents were indiscriminately valuable. She had been with other children. They had left her behind. He was not sure whether he wanted to know if they thought she was dead. I'm going to try, he said. Piltover would want to see someone behind bars. It would not be Talus, but almost certainly it could not be her either. She would have to give up an older accomplice, perhaps. Maybe the older leader of the gang she worked for instead of children her age. She couldn't be more than 13, and he had the feeling she was fiercely loyal to those who had convinced her to come topside. What is your name? Another glaring look from her before she very cautiously said, Powder. Did not seem like a lie. Maybe it was a nickname. But there was surely someone out there who called her Powder. Or had called her Powder. I'm Victor. He had no surname either, a fact that he could tell she was mulling over. He hoped she was realizing that he had been equally truthful with her and had not lied about being from the Undercity. Where exactly were your friends planning to take the materials? Powder shuffled around before quickly shoving her hands forwards into their side satchels, canisters falling all around the infirmary floor. She shoved 4 glowing stones towards him and a bronze-crafted horse. There! It's all there, except the one that blew up. The stones were beautiful, unrefined, and almost certainly magical. Arcane essence radiated off of them. He guessed she was giving him this to avoid the truth that her companions had taken more. Are these how you survived the apartment cave-in? He asked, already knowing the answer. You're going to laugh at me. I promise I won't. They started glowing, and like this big blue bubble surrounded me. She spat the words out quickly. You had to be born with arcane talents to be able to use them. Why was Talus experimenting with this in his apartment? I think I will take those from you now, Powder. Victor let the girl hand them to him. They weren't reacting to the motion from being transferred. It was still unclear how the explosion had occurred. Victor still had no proper way to store them. He stood to get gauze from a drawer and began to make a nest of sorts. He then reached for one of her dropped canisters. They seemed hollow and could perhaps store the stones if there was a gentle encasing. Be careful with Mauser, Powder chastised him. He realized the canister had a face and a drawing of a mouse on it. It was irregularly shaped, but attached to a mechanism that allowed each layer of the canister to twist on a timer until releasing. Powder swatted his hand away right before the canister erupted with a spurt of sad air. You made this. Victor could hear metal clanking inside. It was incredibly intricate for her age. Better than what he had been making then. But I wasn't making bombs. Yeah, it didn't work, but if it had, you would have lost an eye. He had no retort for that. All he dumbly said was, Are you hungry? Heimerdinger looked past Victor's knee and into the dormitory suite. The short man was nervously twirling his long mustache. Powder was asleep, finally. She had gotten close to running away once. Victor had seen it in her eye. The way she would look at the window or the door and then back at him and his cane. The look would fade, though, as he asked her another question about her inventions. He began to consider that maybe she wasn't the only one thinking of escape. Maybe she was waiting for someone to find her. Powder had inhaled any food he gave her, and as the hours moved later into the night, she could not stay awake. Heimerdinger pinched his brow. Victor, I told you to bring back dangerous materials, not a suspect. Ah, well, a suspect can be considered dangerous. You know that's not what I meant. Victor lowered his voice. They have not found the others she was with. Heimerdinger shook his head. I'm afraid not. They're turning the entire Undercity upside down. I'm hoping to exonerate poor Jace before the rest of the council decides to take it on him any further. An interesting way to put it. Victor could not describe the emotion sitting in the concave where his ribs met. If you could explain to the council that it was an accidental vandalism, perhaps there could be leniency afforded to her as well. I believe a compromise can be made. What are you considering, Victor? I know she is traditionally too young to enter the junior sector of the academy, but if what I have seen is true, then perhaps the academy could take over her stewardship like it had for Sky and Victor. You and I both know that could be difficult on account of her parents coming to claim her. We cannot just induce a child to Piltover. A poisonous thought entered Victor's mind for only a second. He had always been grateful for the professor finding him in the water wheel shaft. At that point, he had had no one to rely on, and that was why it had been so easy to coax him across the river. The man meant well. The man had the wisdom of living hundreds of years. Heimerdinger had saved Victor from destitution. Victor squashed the thought. He clutched at his cane. No one has come for her, and no one has claimed responsibility in the Undercity yet. Her engineering is crude, and she's had little formal education. But I don't think that should matter if you vouched for her staying. Heimerdinger let out a puff, but then raised his eyebrows almost happily. I can see you're willing to argue this point. Your morals and steadfast standards have always been something I have respected, Victor. For that, you will take primary charge of her stewardship. Wait, no, Professor. I am only 22. Professor, that's typically your job to care for. For the students I handpicked, Victor, you have clearly found yourself in a similar position. I'm so proud of you. There's no greater reward than cultivating a young mind and finding family amidst a fellow inventor. She ran away, of course. The council was furious and continued to turn their wrath to the Undercity. Victor slinked away into the shadows at least. It was there that he found Jace and the pair began to create the concept of Hex Tech. What was strange was that she came back 3 days later. Victor wondered if a belt looped over a pulley wasn't simply Heimerdinger's personality, but just the way his own life functioned. Victor had returned to his dorm room after he and Jace said, there was no way to describe it. They had done something incredible. They had done it together. Victor had never imagined the egotistical upperclassman in him could have built something, but they had. He had felt seen, so absolutely seen and understood, and Jace had been kinder and more familiar than a brother. Victor had approached his dormitory and realized the door had been forced open. He could have called for help, but he had not. He was glad later he hadn't. Powder had sat curled in his room, and all he dumbly said was, I didn't think you were coming back. He was amazed she had somehow snuck into the academy. It was like the bomb she had built. There was a level of power to this small girl that was shocking on all degrees. They're dead, was all Powder said. He was not shocked. The Undercity, people died often and easily and unfairly. He sat down near her, not saying anything, and she cried on the floor the entire night as he rested a hand atop her head. And that, my friends, was the end of the prologue. What an intro into the new channel. What an intro into a whole new story. Props to an independent artist, Ukulele Villain. This was a whole different thing than I'm used to reading. I have read plenty of fantasy now, but this is a whole different fandom, a whole different lore. This was just a prologue to, we have, how many was it? We have chapters and chapters of this now. We have an epilogue in here. This is a 234-page fan fiction with different parts. So I think it's part 1, 2, 3, and 4 after this, and then an epilogue. So this is just this is a nice little start. I like it. I believe Powder, is Jinx. We've got Jace. We've got Victor. Funny enough, when I did play League of Legends, Victor and Jace were probably some of my favorite characters. Until you got to Draven or someone crazy like that that's just mentally unstable. So I was so used to it was so wild looking up new Victor stuff since I hadn't seen Arcane yet, and seeing Victor wholly different than what I was used to pre-Victor looking like in the older lore, as well as Jace too. You know, the just like the nice shaved, clean person, into seeing pictures of him more rugged and more like not maybe desperate. I guess would be the kind of thing, like a plea in his eye versus full confidence and kind of like almost like an arrogance about his aura. I like where this is going too. So this is like a little bit of Jinx's kind of backstory, that Jace was helping her out or she was stealing from Jace or something like that was happening. And we're learning more as this story goes on. Uh, Again, you can find all of this on AO3 Archive of Our Own through the author Ukulele Villain. And I'm so happy to keep going on this and have this be our first full audiobook series. If I mispronounced anything, I do apologize. I'm trying to figure out a lot of this lore that's newer that I'm not familiar with as I go forward. And I try to use the voices from what I remember from League of Legends also. So we'll see how that pulls out. All I want to do is say thank you all so much. So make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we will see you in the next chapter.